What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of A Great Conversation here on Nerds and Suits. Thank you so much for an awesome launch week. This will be the third episode of this show and sort of the final interview in the launch week. You guys have been unreal in the comments, your support, your subscriptions to the channel. I mean, everything has really blown me away. So I'm very excited about the future. And the third episode, as I mentioned, is an interview today with Alanah Pearce. You may know Alanah from her days at IGN. You might know her from the stuff she does with Funhaus. You might just know her from being kind of hilarious on Twitter. But all in all, she's just sort of all over the place. She's got an incredible YouTube channel. She's on Twitch. And she's been around really doing it for a while. And she tells some very cool stories today on the show. She talks about her experience at IGN, leaving IGN. She's very honest about that. She talks about just sort of being an independent content creator and how she functions in that world now while also doing contract jobs. And just generally a really fun conversation. It was cool to talk to her. She also calls Scarface overrated, which hot take I agree with, but get to that on the show. Thanks for tuning into the episode, guys. And of course, leave a comment, like, subscribe. It really does mean everything when you guys leave those comments and hit those thumbs up. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll be back every single week with another episode of A Great Conversation. Have a good one, guys. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of A Great Conversation here on Nerds and Suits. Today, I've got a guest that I'm very, very excited to talk to. And this is somebody that you just may know from seeing all over the place. You may remember her from IGN. You may know her from Funhaus. You may know her just from being generally pretty awesome. We have today Alanah Pearce jumping in. Alanah, how you doing?
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's a very nice intro.
It's really nice to meet you. I know on like digital social media and things like that, you and I have interacted before, but I've never actually gotten to have a conversation with you before.
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like we've probably been following each other on Twitter for like several years at this point.
It does feel
sometimes
that way.
This is how this happens.
Yeah, I know. It's funny now more than anything because it's even beyond that because everybody's living in the corner of their apartment in their little office, right?
Yeah, it's been a lot. I keep thinking you're in LA, right?
Yeah.
I keep thinking about how difficult it's going to get as it gets hotter, even today. Like, we're so used to being in offices with air conditioning and everyone's just in their own apartments, like dealing with this heat the way that they can. And it's like, this is going to be an interesting one for everyone here in LA. Used to being able to go to the beach.
I keep thinking to myself, like, and I always liked my little apartment in Santa Monica. I've always been a fan of this apartment, but I keep thinking, like, man, I just need to live somewhere bigger. And it's like,
yeah,
I guess that's probably how everybody's feeling at this point. But it's like,
I have a studio, man. My biggest thing is I wish I had a yard. I keep being like, can you imagine somewhere to be in the sun, outdoors? That'd be amazing.
Playing
but here we are.
Something like that. Yeah,
I'll take it. Nope, none of that.
But so you've been dealing with the LA heat now for a few years. When did you come to Los Angeles originally?
So I've been in the US for 5 years, but moved to LA, like, forgetting. I think it was 2018, start of June. End of June. It would have been after E3. So I left IGN, had to wait for my visa with Rooster Teeth / Funhaus, which takes a really long time because I'm on an O1 visa. It's a very complicated process. So then I started working for them in August. So I had this like 2-month limbo of basically just like a free holiday time off in LA. And yeah, I've been here for 2 years now.
Awesome. And I mean, do you miss home? Do you prefer Los Angeles? What's the lay of the land for you there?
Oh, well, by choice, I would still live in Australia for sure. That's where all my family is. That's where everyone I know is. That's where all my friends are. People ask me all the time, like, if you could do your job, would you do it from Australia? I'm like, absolutely, I would do it from home. But, I've been in the games industry for 8 years total. And even in the time that I was in Australia, which is still bulk of that time, it just very quickly became clear to me that there were a lot of restrictions and limitations being in the Australian industry, and I really needed to work in the US industry. So moved to San Francisco, got a job at IGN, which was definitely part of my like long-term plan, was to do literally exactly that. And yeah, then ended up at Funhaus. So I really like living in LA. I love the weather here. There are a lot of really cool areas. I remember when I was visiting LA for E3 or for conventions before I actually moved here, I didn't like it very much. And then now that I'm actually living here, I feel like I know the city a little bit better. I definitely like it here. But yes, long answer. The short answer is I like LA, would prefer to live in Australia, required to be here for the games industry, really, and for the fast internet.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, is the internet way worse there?
Oh my God, it's terrible. Australian internet is awful. It would take me like 3 days to download a game. Wow. Terrible.
I guess I never really thought about that.
Depends
that's
where.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't stream. It would take me usually like a day and a half to upload a YouTube video. I'd have to leave my laptop on overnight. And when I was reviewing games, when I started out as a freelancer, I would have a lot of trouble hitting the embargo, which is like the publish date for a review,
Right.
because it would take me so long to download the game, and then I would have less time to play it, and then I would have to still have it finished. So I would literally lose 3 days of embargo time because the download speeds were so bad. Some parts of the country are all right, but where my family is, it's all terrible.
That's wild. What part of
Mhm.
Australia are you from?
Queensland, which is basically like the Florida of Australia, whereas
Okay.
Melbourne has very good internet. Some parts of Sydney, I think,
Right.
have pretty good internet, but Queensland, not so much.
It's funny. I think that people, U.S. people, they think about other parts of the world and they're just like, country, it's all the same place, and it's like it's not the case. I recently traveled to
Yeah.
Nuremberg in Germany for the first time, and I got to go to Nuremberg, and I went to Munich a little bit. I didn't get to go to Berlin, but like wasn't the biggest fan of Nuremberg in the end. It like, wasn't my favorite place. But then somebody explained to me, they were like, imagine if you went to the U.S. and you went to Indianapolis or something like that. And you're like,
True.
so this is America. This is
Well,
how
the
it all
first place
is.
I went to in the US was Atlanta, which I
Okay.
didn't love, because I guess Atlanta's a weird city to be the first one you visit as a tourist. I was actually there for the Smite World Championships,
Okay.
so I didn't know anyone. I didn't really have anywhere to go, and it was freezing. So it was January. It was so cold. I had a really weird experience doing that, and then I went to LA and to San Francisco and New York and everywhere else. But yeah, I feel like Australia is people often underestimate the size. It's the same size as the US. It's the landmass wise, it's huge. It's a really big country. We do have a few different accents. So all the time we'll be like, oh, people say like I don't sound Australian. And I'm sure that my accent has changed a little bit living here for 5 years, but for the most part, it's just that the country's really big, and Americans tend to only hear one Australian accent where there are
Right.
multiple, just like there are in the US. Definitely like one of my favorite things about living in the US in total is that different cities and states have vastly different cultures. It's almost like going to different countries, whereas Australia, only a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
sure, those cities are a little bit different, but the country's so new comparatively, and the population's much smaller, so things don't feel as distinct as they feel here, which is like very cool part of the US. Things can feel different countries completely.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about the streaming speed. I never really thought about the fact that I can't think of a ton of Australian streamers. I mean, I can think of a few, but I guess there's probably less. If
I guess I know a ton just by having had been there,
Yeah,
but
that
they
would
are
make sense.
limited in where they stream from for sure. Like it's there are pockets of the country where you can and pockets where you can't.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about you mentioned that your plan was IGN. I know you said in other interviews I've heard you say before that IGN was the plan, and you even actually had it planned out as far as Rooster Teeth. You actually wanted to follow the exact path that you're on. So when you get that first experience to get the job with IGN, do you remember like you aggressively targeted that job, or it just sort of you applied? And there it was?
No, the job that I actually got was toys and culture editor. So my plan was I was studying university at the time while also working part-time as a writer and host. So I was already very much in games media. I had worked for Xbox in Australia for a little bit. I was working on national radio, did some stuff on national television. And then I intentionally got like the amount of grades that I needed in university where I was studying Bachelor of Mass Communication, majoring in journalism and entertainment, so that I could transfer to a university in California, which was in San Jose, with the intention of meeting people that I still kind of knew from games media by virtue of still working in that industry, but specifically in San Francisco because I knew that was the hub for games media, really. So I did that, made that transfer for 6 months for my degree, and was still working for Australian outlets while in university in the US. Met people at IGN, applied. It was my 5th time applying that they finally gave me an interview, which I always want to like paint to people how hard it was. It was like, yeah, I'd applied 5 times and only been spoken to 1 time. And the 1 time that I was spoken to was for a job which was toys and culture editor. And it was really because I feel like it would have been pretty much impossible to find anyone who could do that job better than I could at the time. In that, you know, I had all the media experience, the hosting experience, I had the writing experience, but I'm also a very big toy collector. I actually just got one in the mail today, and the box is so big that I don't know what to do with it. It's like 82 centimeters tall. It's massive.
What'd you get?
It's Batman Who Laughs, which is basically like a Batman comic series.
Okay.
It's enormous, But yeah, so I applied for that particular job just because I wanted to work at IGN with the intention of being in games media. But that's such a competitive field, so I got in through toys and culture, which also included cosplay, and I had a little bit of experience with cosplay and also science, which is just something that I'm very passionate about. So I was writing science news for IGN too, while also doing some game reviews and features and stuff like that. And eventually I got promoted to being a producer, which still really just meant I was just doing everything.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that particular job didn't even exist until the timing worked out really well for me to be able to apply for it. So it's not that I worked towards that particular job. I definitely just wanted to work at IGN or at GameSpot. But I did also get offered a job there, but they couldn't even pay me enough that I would be able to afford to live anywhere nearby. So it didn't seem doable to have to move countries and then be very remote and like figure my whole life out that way. Whereas IGN were A, more open to paying for my visa, and B, I think it was IGN doesn't pay well. It's not like I had a good salary. They don't pay well for an entry level position at all. But I felt like my life was more possible under that company than the other one, basically.
Well,
so I did that.
Yeah, so IGN is one of the few companies left that's sort of in the digital media space that has managed to survive through I guess, what you call it, really, the last 10 years of digital media expansion and then everything exploding, the funding dying for every company. It's one of the only ones left I can think of that was, I guess, big enough, and probably because they were so closely tied to the gaming industry, and video games are so much more dependable than a lot of these like podcast companies and movie review shows and things like that. But yeah, I think it was a great company, obviously, for you to get your start. I know it probably wasn't about the salary when you started. It was about building your name and getting the experience.
Well, I wouldn't even say it was my start or building my experience, because by that time, like by the time I got hired, I already had, 200,000 followers from my work in Australia. I'd already worked for about 30 outlets, maybe more. So I didn't need either of those things. It was just a great opportunity for me to get funding to be able to transfer countries, which is a lot harder.
So literally, that was it. That was the reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I wanted to live in the US. It was that I wanted to work in the US games industry because it's where I felt like I needed to be if this is a career that I wanted to pursue. So in terms of getting a start, I was good on that. I felt like I had tons of experience already. I had the journalism that I'd studied. Like I was doing good there. It's just that IGN was the best option for me to get a visa. And you're in part right that like, sure, IGN has had troubles with funding and in some ways are falling apart and in some ways aren't working there. That's all very clear. But one thing I can say is IGN gets so much money just from the wikis. So like their GTA guides and their Minecraft guides alone, because they're so comprehensive, could probably keep that site afloat. They could run the server costs just on those wiki pages. The reviews obviously do really well. That's been years and years and years of work. But it's not like I feel like IGN is like massively profitable. They're owned by Ziff Davis or J2 Global. And I think that they do have a lot of luck with funding because J2 is in parts a media company. They own like a lot of fitness health brands, actually. IGN makes the most money, so they get a lot of financial support. They're like J2 or probably Ziff Davis's like kind of golden child or the most well-known brand that they have. So they do pretty well, but I think that like media probably is in a bit of trouble right now. I remember the day that PewDiePie, I think, streamed The Last Guardian, and some of the execs at IGN were like, why wouldn't they give that to us? That doesn't make any sense. We're IGN. Why would they give it to PewDiePie? It was like, well, because he has millions and millions and millions of subscribers, he's going to get more viewers. And they were like, but we have millions of these, like, because they're counting like their Twitter and their Instagram and their YouTube and all these like dead accounts that don't necessarily interact with the content that much. So it was interesting for me, especially as someone who came into IGN with a YouTube channel. That was always just a hobby for me, but it's something that I had, to see the old executive media completely misunderstand the industry shifting around it in favor of other kinds of content creators. I don't think that's consistent for everyone in management at IGN, but it was definitely something that I saw that was like, how do you guys not understand this? Whereas Rooster Teeth is much more on the content creation side.
It definitely feels like that's all changed, especially in the last few years. I mean, those stories I can remember. Like, I got into hosting in 2014, and prior to that, I had been acting and like modeling, shit like that. But I kind of moved on from a lot of that stuff, and hosting became what I really wanted to do. And I remember in 2014, that time there was still kind of a dream in my mind of like get a job as a host, like a really well-paid job on television, and get to do cool things and travel and subjects that I was interested in. And as
Get those insane exclusivity clauses though, and
as the years
year-long contracts.
and I met people, and I met the agencies that represented hosts, and more agencies that I would talk to, like, yeah, we don't even have a hosting division anymore. Like that was a lot of what I would hear. And then you start to realize like that those 1% jobs were shrinking, and it was in favor of creators like you're just talking about, where you have your own channel and you would get paid as much money just monetizing your own channel over the course of a year than you would doing the job. And the audience difference at that point started to shift, where there weren't as many people watching television. There weren't as many people watching those cable networks with the big hosting shows. And
IGN still has hosts, but I would argue that they are very inefficient job roles, because I was never a host at IGN despite doing a lot of stuff on camera. I always wrote more than I hosted, and I was a producer, which for anyone who doesn't know, it just really involves a lot of planning. It's a lot of, this needs to be made at this time because this is trending right now. We need to get this up, and it's watching over the edit process and just making sure that things go out and perform, basically, is what a producer does in terms of media. But the host role is people who get paid a lot more than everyone else and don't do as much. Like, I don't think it's, it makes sense for contract positions, but I think in a lot of cases, like even me being at IGN and not getting paid as much as the host, but feeling like I was working double the hours was frustrating. Even when I was hosting the Daily Fix, it was like literally a daily show, but I wasn't a host, so I didn't get paid anywhere near as much as I should have. So it's a role that I think makes a lot more sense to be contract or like for hire. But yeah, now sometimes YouTubers can't actually do it. Like if you have experience being a host, you can sometimes watch it happen live, or you hire someone who's just a YouTuber to host something, and they can't, because making YouTube content or even streaming is a very specific style of speaking to camera, whereas hosting, especially something for a company as sort of an ambassador, is a very different skill set.
Totally. Yeah, you have to be smoother, cleaner. You don't get tons of jump cuts and a million takes like this. And your physical presentation matters so much more. The way you're put together, they're not going to shoot you from exactly one angle as it pertains to you. I mean,
beautifully lit every time.
Yeah. You talk about working at IGN and those times. Do you think that you were treated fairly for what you put in?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Like, it depended on the manager, really. I was definitely underpaid. They knew I was underpaid, and I remember when I was leaving, I was like, what did my boss say? He said something along the lines of like, we knew we weren't paying you enough, and that it would become a problem. And like, the day that I was asking for raises repeatedly and being like, you guys aren't paying me enough, this is insane. Because the public's like, you're making $100,000 a year. And I was like, I can't pay rent. It was like very, very, very brutal to live in San Francisco, the Bay Area specifically, and not make very much money. And also have this public perception that you make a lot of money because you're a host at IGN. Doesn't mean anything. So I kept asking. And then, the day that I announced that I'm leaving, they're like, we'll match it. We'll give you whatever salary you want. And they're like, so you have money. You just weren't giving it to me this whole time. And that's how businesses work. So in some parts I was mistreated, and that I was pretty brutally overworked and definitely underpaid. But that was more, the overworking was more of a structural problem, I think, in that because I wasn't a host, but I also wasn't a full-time writer, but I had both of those skills, those departments would fight over me a lot or try to use me a lot for both things. So I was also doing a lot of social stuff. I was running the Instagram for a while, and I was hosting on Snapchat for IGN. So I was basically doing 3 jobs, and that was kind of the problem that they did end up sorting out when it was clear that I was just doing way too much. But people at IGN, I still miss all the time. That building is full of a lot of people that I really love, who are very supportive in a lot of ways, who gave me credit for the things that I did. And one very cool thing about IGN that I don't think the public realizes is that you really can write whatever you want. I never had anyone say, well, you can't do that, you'll upset this developer or this publisher. That stuff never happened. I wrote a lot of anti-EA stuff. I did anti-Bethesda stuff. I did anti-Ubisoft stuff. I was negative about a lot of the big publishers, and never even once did I get anyone telling me not to. It was always just a ton of praise. And I wrote this one feature that took me about 6 months, and I interviewed 20 different developers for it. And a lot of other outlets would rush you on that kind of content and be like, this is taking too long. But they were very supportive about me taking the time to make that piece what it was, which was specifically about the idea of the decline of single-player games. So, Yeah, IGN is both like a very difficult place to work, and I think anyone who leaves IGN has this like little bit of PTSD, especially in a job role like mine, where they were like, "Man, I worked so much, and it feels weird to be in a job where now I'm not overworked and stressed all the time, and like constantly checking my emails, and my life was just IGN 100% of the time." But it was also an environment that I loved being in, that I still miss, that I'm still very grateful for, and I'm still friends with literally everyone who is still in that building that I worked with at the time. Like it's a very interesting mix of the best place ever and a really hard place to work.
When you left, did you feel like you had grown like a fan base? You had like a lot of new fans, a lot of new support, or did you couldn't like track it as well?
It's interesting for me because I for sure did. Like I for sure would have grown an audience by virtue of working in IGN, but then I was still making YouTube content, and I have very specific Instagram and Twitter brands that um, basically when I left, I gained hundreds of thousands of followers. Part of that would have been because I left and people wanted to follow me after leaving. But most of that, I think, was that I no longer had the restrictions that came with working from IGN. So I was making better content. So as soon as I was able to leave and I was able to talk about video games on YouTube, because part of my clause with IGN was that I wasn't allowed to talk about anything entertainment related, couldn't stream, I wasn't allowed to do any of that stuff. It was brutal. Because I left and in part complained about that, they actually got rid of those restrictions, which is great for everyone else. Sucked for me for 3 years. But I guess, yes, I definitely would have gotten an audience from IGN, but I also, that entire time, would have independently grown an audience at the same rate anyway. So it's kind of hard to see where people come from. And I also try not to get caught up in that, following sources or numbers too much, because that could probably make someone crazy.
100%. All right, so it's the IGN part of your story, obviously, is just one part that a lot of people knew you from. But you mentioned when you leave that you get all these new followers because there's no restrictions. That's been happening more and more. I was doing stuff at Collider. A lot of my friends were doing stuff there when the big, I don't know if you're following that, when the big blowout happened, they kind of let everybody go. And everybody jumped over and launched these YouTube channels that seemingly overnight that had 10, 20, 30, 50,000 subscribers. That seems to sort of be the model now, is that it's harder and harder for these larger companies, the parent companies, to support the actual needs of the talent. And I don't actually know in this day and age how you could foster independent creators when people are so willing and able to monetize their audience directly. I mean, that's something that exists now that I feel like 5 to 10 years ago really didn't.
I think it's a bad idea. Like, I think that trying to stop talent from making content on their own not only is very frustrating for talent, especially if they're creative and they're people who want to go home and create more content, but also is a bad idea for your brand, in that, I could have been Twitch streaming the whole time that I was at IGN. I wasn't allowed to. But if I had, what would there be to say that I wouldn't grow an audience there who would then follow me to IGN or think
100%.
more favorably of IGN, because then they would have access to an IGN employee who very candidly speaks about controversial things like review scores, and you can actually speak to someone about it. But because IGN cut off all those avenues, you didn't have anyone talking about any of that stuff outside of just tweets. So I feel like it could have benefited the brand to let me do that, which I'm sure it is now in a lot of ways. And it just seems so outdated to try to lock people down. But at the same time, from IGN's perspective, kind of funny, which is Greg Miller and Nick Scarpino and Tim Geddes and Kevin. They formed a group. They grew a brand while still at IGN and then left with that brand. And I'm like, well, as a business, yeah, that sucks. Like, that would be an awful thing to happen, that you would be fostering these talent, paying them salaries, and they're working on a side business that they then take away. And I get why they would want to prevent that from happening. I just think it's an outdated mindset.
Yeah, the model. Well, it's like, it's the old. That's all the old television model, the old film studio model. And the only way in my mind that actually works now is you literally have to have a ton of capital, a really good concept. You bring in people with no following whatsoever who you can guarantee are talented and are coachable, and you build them and grow them. And then when they're ready to leave, they leave. And then you have to replace them with new talent that has no following. Because if you have no following and no ability to go work for yourself, that's exactly the position you should be in. You should be working really hard with the support of a company that wants to build your brand and trying to grow your following. But if you have a following and you actually can wield that, and you can say, I can bring this quantifiable number of people to come watch, then I deserve this much money because I can do it on my own. And
but even that, like, they're fully two sides. Where now I feel like, Rooster Teeth probably in part wanted me because I had a large following. Same as IGN. Sure, they were like, oh, she has 80,000 YouTube subscribers or whatever. I think I maybe had 100,000 Twitter followers by then too, before they hired me. So they would have been like, well, we want that. But then they take this YouTube channel and tell me I'm not allowed to use it.
Bizarre,
Just seemed insane. They hired me for it and then stopped me from using it. So there are two sides in it. If you have someone with a big following, you should pay them for their following. But then at the same time, if you want someone who isn't going to make any kind of content, even if they have no following outside of your brand, then you should pay them a lot. I feel like that's the only way that I would do it. Where I didn't get that at IGN, but I wanted the opportunity to work at IGN. Obviously, that was worth it for me. As restrictive as it was, and as over time, I definitely got sick of it. But I feel like the only way you really can get away with it is if you're paying them a lot of money.
Yeah.
But no one in media has that money anymore. It ran out.
So back in like the old days of media, the biggest stars in the world were musicians and movie stars, right? They were the people that could get the most money to make content, and they were usually making it for a larger company. So, and they were known for one thing, for one big thing. But nowadays, everybody is in everything, right? LeBron James is both a basketball player, but he's also a global brand. He has clothing, and he's in movies now. And it's kind of the same case with anybody who's really, really famous. Is your dream sort of with what you're doing? Do you still have a clear picture, a singular picture of where you want to end up? Or is it diversified like so many?
I'm very diversified right now. And I think that I will probably keep that up in terms of my enjoyment of it. Like, for example, I do stream on Twitch now, but I don't make any money streaming on Twitch because I don't care. So I don't have subs even enabled. I've intentionally not partnered because I wanted to be able to stream on multiple platforms. So there's like, I will stay diverse in what I do because I enjoy that as a creative. But in terms of my goal, yeah, I still have a pretty clear goal. I think I want to write video games. That will be the next step of what I do when I decide I'm sick of doing stuff on camera. Definitely writing is still always been my favorite thing to do. I was always hired as a writer everywhere I've worked, really, other than Funhaus, where I was hired as a producer. But yeah, write video games is the next thing I want to do. I don't think that will stop me from having multiple creative outlets, but I do generally have a very distinct vision of what it is that I want to do professionally. And I don't see being an independent or just being a content creator ever being on the table for me, because I like working with teams too much. I really like having a team of people to collaborate with.
You mentioned writing video games, and I've heard you talk a little bit about that. You think video games right now are kind of in their infancy, that it's a really, really young business, and that it's going to grow as an art form. Are you like a movie and TV person as well? Like, do you get a lot of inspiration from that stuff? Or are you not as connected to that, games or your story?
I don't watch TV really at all. I've started watching more film over the last few years, but I had missed out on so many up until recently. So generally, no. I read a lot of books though. So I've spent pretty much my whole life reading fantasy for the most part, and a bit of sci-fi. But no, I mean, my whole life has really been video games. That's the thing that I do, and I've played a lot of games, and it's an asset to me professionally. Because I haven't watched TV and film, I feel like I missed out on all of that shit because all I do is play video games. But I'm happy. I enjoy it. But yeah, definitely, I have a big lapse in film and TV for sure.
That's really interesting. So you don't have all the built up classic huge stories that so many people, and everything from The Godfather to Star Wars.
I watched The Godfather for the first time this year.
How did you like the first one?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And the second, did not watch the third.
Okay, the third gets a bad rap, and I'll tell you that I recently just rewatched it. It's not the best movie. Like, it definitely has some really bad stuff, and famously, Coppola put his daughter in the movie because Winona Ryder dropped out, and she single-handedly ruins the movie. It's the worst acting I've seen in my life.
Wow.
But she ended up obviously going on to be this huge director, so she had like a great career. But Andy Garcia is really great, and Pacino, old Pacino, I think it's actually Pacino's last really great, like, just like I'm Al Pacino role that he ever did. Yeah. And it's totally worth it. It's very enjoyable if you go in with like tempered expectations, but 1 and 2 are just immaculate. Those movies are so good.
Incredible. Yeah, it's so much stuff that I always wonder, like, is this actually as good as people say it is, or was it like a for the time thing? No, The Godfather was an incredible movie. He was like, I was like, yep, absolutely. The one that got me that I didn't think was as good as I felt like I had heard that it was Scarface.
It's so bad. It's so funny. You say this. I'm so excited that you just said that. It's like I hate that movie.
I don't hate it, but it's stylish, great character work. But I just was like, okay, like, you're not giving me much. And I feel like it's this like hyped up, incredibly popular movie. But when I looked up reviews, actually, they all say pretty much the same thing. Like, I feel like that movie has a cult following for being very stylish, but the critics tend to say the same thing. They're like, yes, it's stylish. It doesn't have a lot of substance. There's not much going on here.
It's like so syrupy and 80s and like
Very
so
80s.
stylized that when you watch it, it actually feels like you're watching somebody right now making a parody of the 80s. That's what that movie feels like.
Yeah, it feels like Vice City. Like, I mean, because it inspired Vice City, but like Vice City feels like a parody. And then Scarface, because I obviously played Vice City before watching Scarface. To me, it felt like they're parodies of one another for sure, which is interesting. Like, it definitely sticks to that style very cohesively. But yeah, I was like, this movie's not fantastic.
I think the 80s is the worst, not in terms of quality, because there's a lot of great 80s movies, but it's the worst decade in terms of movies from the 80s so clearly feel like 80s movies, much more so than any of the other decades.
Yeah, I wonder what sparked that trend. Like, they all very much are 80s movies. I don't feel like I think that way about virtually any other era.
I think the reason, if I don't get too deep with it, is that in the late 70s, there was a lot of freedoms that were given to directors to make the movies they wanted. And by the early 80s, United Artists had been bankrupted by this film called Heaven's Gate. They spent all this money. The guy that did The Deer Hunter, his next movie. And so studios really pulled back on the freedoms they were giving these directors to make these movies. And so a lot of the stuff in the 80s is like, you could get money if you were making something that was like very like commercial friendly, stylized, like had this look and feel that felt like a right now look and feel. Like, this is what's hot, this is what's selling.
Interesting.
Like, this is just what I want to make. And so you even look at a lot of the movies that were being made by those guys in the 70s, and you look at the stuff from the 80s, and it becomes like a whole different ballgame. Like, a lot of those famous directors, a lot of the stuff that they make. I mean, even like Spielberg's a little different, but I mean, Spielberg made the Indiana Jones movies in the 80s. You know, he didn't make those in the 70s.
True.
Anyway, but getting back to storytelling, because I'm interested in this. If you don't have the movie background that inspires this, you've read a lot of fantasy books, I'm very curious to know if you remember like the very first video game that you played where you felt like you were in on the story, like you were really attached to the story of these characters.
Yeah.
Even though this is all I get, I want.
Yeah, it was Ocarina of Time for sure. I'm sure a lot of people say that, but you know, being born in 1993, I think that game came out in 97. It was like exactly the right time for me to have a concept of storytelling and knowing who these characters were. And also, it's a very simple story. It's very easy for, I think, a child to understand what's happening in Ocarina of Time. So that is absolutely the one that I remember like being very attached to on a personal level. The first game I remember like falling in love with Banjo-Kazooie. Similar era, obviously N64. The first game I ever played was a game called Moto Racer, which is a PC motorbike game. You can still download it. It's ridiculous. A lot of fun. But yeah, Ocarina of Time was the one that I think made me, that or Banjo-Kazooie, like really fall in love with video games, along with Perfect Dark, Jet Force Gemini, like just that whole 64 era for sure. And I actually, when I turned 21, might have even been 18, because that isn't a more important birthday in Australia. It would have been 18, yeah. So I had just gotten paid, I think, for my first few like published articles as a writer. I was writing for magazines in Australia initially, as well as working for free on some websites, but you get paid to publish in a magazine. And I, with that money, bought myself a statue, which ties into me getting that Toys and Culture job, of Darunia from Ocarina of Time. Because it felt like this sentimental thing to like come full circle and be like, well, I think this game is probably a very pivotal game for me in terms of like ending up here in the long run, and like what it did to me as a kid and how amazed I was by it. And then I was finally then making money from that thing. So I put the money back into that thing and bought myself this statue. And that was kind of a moment for me of like, you know, I think I'm going to take this and just make it the rest of my life, even though it had already been a very big part of my life. But it was a very just dumb, sentimental moment for me for sure. But funnily enough, Ocarina of Time isn't one of my favorite games. It's just a game that was like very important for me at the time.
So, but you have great memories of it, I'm sure. And I have to ask, what is your favorite theme of the temples? Like, which is the one that had, like, when you hear it, like, always makes you misty-eyed?
I'm actually going to say Lost Woods.
Okay.
Which I made my town theme in Animal Crossing. I think it's just like, even, it's probably that is the first time in that game, or maybe in any game I had played up until that point, that I remember being just completely amazed by what I was walking into, because it's really early in the game that you hear that. Obviously, I love Song of Storms though too, to be fair. But what the Lost Woods meant in terms of just the wonderment or curiosity, very much stuck in my head, and I still love that song.
I've always loved when he goes back at the forest temple, that really kind of haunting, like
Yeah, some of it's creepy.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I
never
love Majora's Mask. Like, I prefer Majora's Mask as a game to Ocarina of Time. Like, I would put that higher on my Zelda list. That game's creepy as hell. The first nightmare I remember having was about Majora's Mask.
I never got all the way through Majora's Mask, so I played video games a lot, like, probably from the Nintendo through like PS2-ish era, and then pretty much stopped. Like I haven't really played video games in the modern era, but those old games I got like really drunk the other night and tried to plug in my old Super Nintendo so I could try to beat Diddy Kong's Quest again, because it's like my favorite game of all time.
Very nice.
But like Ocarina's in the same boat, and I remember I played Majora's Mask. I got halfway through and I noticed that stuff with the clock, like the clock tower and like the day resetting and the sound design, it is really creepy. It's really effective. It's very, very cool. And I guess that's sort of a taste of things to come as video games would develop into such a different zone of like every game now feels like it's sort of a movie experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, our Ocarina of Time started that too. Like, even now, if you interview Japanese developers, for the most part, they'll be like, well, we were inspired by Ocarina of Time. In one instance, Nier Automata, Automata. Anyways, in my head goes Automata, but it's Automata. That game, I think I was watching a panel at GDC, and the design team was basically like, we were trying to figure out the map size, and then we were wondering what the ideal map size is for a video game. So we just made it the same size as Ocarina of Time. And you still hear that all the time, that most games are inspired by Ocarina of Time. And I like thinking about that in a way that, like, obviously Majora's Mask was. It's just sort of an iteration on Ocarina of Time and probably less popular. But we still have this whole generation of devs who grew up playing Ocarina of Time. And obviously more people are aging in. But I kind of look forward to what the era is when we have developers who grew up playing The Last of Us or Gears of War or God of War, like, and what their games look like, because they didn't grow up with Ocarina of Time. Because everything right now is sort of Ocarina of Time or it's Half-Life. That's like a lot of our single player experiences. So what's it going to look like when the people who are growing up now playing completely different games than the ones that everything's iterated up? What a game's going to look like? We kind of have no idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I even tweeted the other night. I was like, aren't like Norman Osborn and Ganondorf just kind of like the same person? I feel like they kind of are.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, it didn't do as well for me as I felt like it was going to do, but in my mind, when I saw their heads, I was like,
it's pretty niche. It's pretty niche.
It's pretty niche. Yeah. All right, so that's your passion. It obviously comes from these things that you grew up with, and you are continuing down that path as a creative. I guess my other question for you is, if you were going to specifically work on a franchise that's out right now, like if you just got the offer tomorrow, come and work on the next installment, which one is it?
Probably Fable. So I've done some voice acting too, and I have this video from maybe 2 years ago where someone said, if you could voice act in any franchise, what would it be? And I said Gears of War, and now I've done that, and that's so cool. Like, I love that I have this video clip of me being like, it'd definitely be Gears of War, and the fact that I've now done that is awesome. So I'm like, maybe now it'll mean that I get to work on Fable. But yeah, it would be the next Fable game, which is rumored to be in development at Playground, who are known for Forza Horizon, which is obviously very different, but they recently hired a bunch of people to work on an open world RPG, is all we know. So they've hired people from Rockstar, they've hired people from Naughty Dog, a lot of very prolific studios. And Fable is just like this fantasy RPG with spellcasting garbage that, again, fantasy novel reading, kidding me, loves the combination of those two things. But also it's British, which means that they have that British charm, but also what I would call like Commonwealth sense of humor. So the sense of humor is very much like Australian sense of humor, very similar. It's very silly, just like very stylish as well, and the accents are all wonderful. So I would say Fable would be my go-to, but I don't know that the Fable that I would want to make exists anymore. The most recent iteration of that franchise was Fable Legends, which is like a 4v1 multiplayer game that I didn't want at all, which didn't end up getting released and actually sank the studio. So that's a huge bummer. But if it were, an actual open world RPG Fable, that would be probably my pick to write for. That would be awesome.
Do you still go back to the toy stuff at all? I mean, I know you just ordered the statue, but like, do you have just a general love of like all toys, or is it like collectible statues, things like that?
I only collect statues, really. But yeah, I would say I'm pretty much interested in all of them. So I had to limit myself because otherwise you can spend way too much money.
Yeah, right.
So I've put more and more and more restrictions on myself as time has gone on because I still have like a lot of stuff in Australia that I can't even get here. And then I'm like, every time I move, it's a nightmare because majority of my apartment is basically toys. It looks like a 12-year-old boy's bedroom, basically. So I had to limit myself. But yeah, no, I am very interested in broader toy culture, pretty much all of it.
So a few years ago, a friend of mine who's the co-host on my Magic the Gathering podcast I do, he started a toy company, and
Cool.
And I'm now the vice president of sales of that company, and so I do a lot of
Cool.
work in that world. And we have the number one hoop, like the hula hoop. You know, we have that number one hoop in the world, and a couple other like tactile play balls and jump ropes and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
So I should send you like a box of fun toys.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
Yeah,
So what do you guys do, like toy fair and stuff?
yeah, we do it all. Yeah, so I go to New York Toy Fair in Dallas, and I go to Hong Kong. That's what I was in Nuremberg for. Was the first toy fair.
Got it. Very cool.
Yeah.
That
So it's
sounds fun
interesting you
too.
were saying the toy thing. It's a
Yeah.
world that I just was totally before I got into it. I like definitely had no idea how that world worked. Or
Yeah, I mean, look, I very specifically specify in like nerdy toy stuff, but covering toys at IGN did mean going to Toy Fair, seeing all of the stuff that's coming out and seeing how that industry functions. And one thing that I think is just very cool about toys is the relationship between toys and Star Wars, which is really that Star Wars created the action figure industry more or less.
Yep.
Toys and merchandise funded those films, and the companies that then changed the film industry by virtue of George Lucas creating them and making money from those toys. So yeah, toys are underrated, very important, even if it's My Little Pony, like what that did for a lot of creatives and artists and even marketing, and the relationship between cartoons and toys, massive. That stuff's so interesting. Barbie too. It's all very fascinating stuff.
I mean, there will always be kids, and there will always be toys that those kids need.
Yep.
So when you jumped over to start doing the stuff with Funhaus, that the vibe of that is a little different than IGN. Am I correct in that? Like Funhaus, kind of comedy oriented in general, or am I wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely comedy oriented. And I was producing comedy Let's Plays at IGN. So I was producing 2 of those a week anyway of my own accord. That's something that I was like, I would like this to be part of IGN's brand. But it takes a really long time for stuff to take off like that. Obviously Up at Noon is IGN's talk show, which definitely like ebbed and flowed in that. But for a lot of our podcasts, no swearing, no sexual references. Like they were very strict about a lot of just content in general. Whereas Funhaus certainly doesn't have any of those restrictions. So when I left, like my reasons for leaving IGN were very transparent. It was just I had done everything. They offered me more money, they offered me more freedom when I left, but I felt like I had capped my experience at that company. Like, sure, you could give me a better job title, but I was already running a lot of things and doing everything there, and I didn't think that I had anything else to learn. And also been in games media for I think 6 years at that point. It was a long time for me to have been doing that one thing. If I include the stuff I did for free, it's more like 8. So it was a solid chunk of my life that I still do now anyway with Inside Gaming, which is actually part of a Rooster Teeth brand that I am still involved in, which is very much media heavy. But yes, Funhaus itself is comedy focused. And I wanted to do that because it was something I enjoyed doing at IGN. I think that a majority of my videos on my channel, other than stuff that's, Q&A or slice of life or whatever, is focused on humor. My Let's Plays have always been that way anyway. But they also have animated shows, TV shows, movies. It was just like this and they make games. So this very different world that I just wanted to get involved in to expand the things that I could do. And I did, and they were very open to me doing that. So the move was a significant one, even though my first 2 months, I think we launched a games journalism show because they ended up wanting me to do it anyway, which was Gaming Weekly, that then shut down when Inside Gaming came back, which is a very long story. So I still lean on those skills a lot, and they definitely rely on me for that stuff. But for the most part, it was wanting to branch out into comedy and live action and try different new things.
Yeah, a lot of the people that you're referencing, I mean, both people that you work with at Funhaus, and then also some of the guys, the kind of funny guys. These are all people that I've interacted with now from the Movie Trivia Schmodown, which is something that I do pretty consistently. I don't know if you know much about it, but it's like a sports league that's all about movie trivia. And
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, Bruce Green competed in it at one point.
Cool.
He was supposed to come in and do a Star Wars championship against the champion, the best in the world, and the guy that was originally supposed to play that guy couldn't show up, and so Green was there, and the guy that runs it was like, "Yeah, do you want to just have your first match against this guy?" And he
Very
was like,
nice.
"Sure." And then it was like a disaster, obviously, because playing against like Mike Tyson, basically. And then Scarpino, I've gotten to hang out with a bit there as well, and he's great. He's like so funny, that guy.
Great guy.
Yeah. His entrances, he has like backup dancers. It's great. But anyway, so these guys are all funny. My question to you is, if you're not watching movies and TV, so what do you find funny? Like, where's your humor coming from?
My family, maybe. But it's it's not like I didn't watch TV growing up. It's just that I watched a very specific slew of things that just my parents watched. So I watched a lot of British comedies like Vicar of Dibley, or what's it called? Keeping Up Appearances, I think it's called. Just like a lot of like old British shows, which comes from my granddad being British. So he is from England. So that was just like fed into my family. So I watched a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, I would say like, I think that pretty much everyone in my family is very funny, very sarcastic, really dry humor a lot of the time. So it's really, really loud, even though there aren't many of us. It's only like 10 people, which I feel like for most families is very small. That's my extended family. It's maybe 12 now. There's 2 kids, but I don't know. It's a good question. My brand of humor is very specific too. There's like definitely things that will make me laugh very, very hard that are very silly. But yeah, I don't feel like I have any comedy inspirations when it comes to people or even media. My biggest thing is just I like being self-deprecating, and that's definitely an Australian thing.
Strong brand. It's always a strong brand. Put fun at yourself. I saw you did this video recently on your YouTube channel that was rating your Instagram DMs. That was pretty funny.
Not intended to be funny, but it's hard not to be funny.
Yeah, I mean, it was poignant. It was interesting. And obviously, as having worked in the space now for a long time and having worked with a lot of very, very talented and successful women, I kind of know the reality of being a woman on the internet. I never experienced it, obviously, but I have heard enough about it. My question to you is, you kept giving advice to all these guys, and as it pertains to you being funny and laughing, have you ever dated a guy that you didn't think was funny at all, that you legitimately like just did not find funny?
No.
Couldn't do it.
I don't think I could. No, I don't think that someone would be attractive to me if I didn't find them funny. Which, funnily enough, like Elise at Funhaus says the same thing. It's like, you have to be funny, but I don't know that I even know many people in my life that I don't find funny. Like, at least most people are a little bit funny, right? It's like at least some kind of bar, I think, but yeah, maybe not. I don't know, but I feel like, I live in a bubble here where I didn't grow up in America, so everyone that I know I met through media, which means that generally everyone I know has been on camera at some point or is in that
charm or something like that.
Kind of, you have to have that kind of job. They're mostly public facing people. Again, not intentional. It's just how would I have even met anyone else? It just happened that way. Because I moved to, pretty late and just went straight into that career full force. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm lucky. Maybe just all my friends are funny. I don't know. I don't know.
You heard it here first, guys. If you're trying to send that DM, you got to be funny. You got to
be funny. Got to be funny.
Yeah, it's important. So all right, so we're in quarantine and everybody's kind of stuck at home, and we all have lots of time on our hands. Is there anything that currently that you weren't working on that now that you're home so much you've started to put work into that you're excited about?
I've really only started doing it this week, which I really thought that I would do it sooner. Which is I'm learning German, which I'd wanted to do for ages anyway. So I'm actually putting the time in to do that every day for maybe about half an hour. But there's stuff that I was doing anyway because I'm actually a contractor at Funhaus, which means that I have free time when I'm not shooting stuff. So I've been writing. It was just 1 book for a while, and now it's like 2 and a screenplay. So I just do a lot of writing for fun. I don't even have the intention of publishing any of that. I just like the writing. It was never a thing that I'm like planning to release. I just want to write stuff. It's a thing that I've just always done my whole life. I was writing novels when I was a kid. I'm sure they're all garbage. I wish I could find them, but I still did it. Otherwise, yeah, trying to lift weights every day. That's the thing that I did anyway. It's been I mean, obviously tough for everyone, but I feel like I am in a tremendous position of privilege in that I'm still working a lot,
Yeah.
and still very busy, which means I don't feel like I'm going stir crazy because I'm still doing my job. So I'm okay. But the one thing that I've really added is I'm going to try and start reading more. That's the next step. Because I haven't been reading very much. Definitely playing a lot of video games, which is fine. But yeah, really the only new introduction is German.
You're working on getting ready to start streaming, speaking in German. It'll be
Exactly.
interesting.
Can't wait.
You mentioned lifting weights, and you're already doing that. And I saw you tweeted recently of this picture of sort of the before and after. You talked about
Mhm.
getting healthy, and there was a lot of comments about it. Obviously, people were very supportive of you in that. I've done that. I've done this like this a few times in my life now, where I've gained it and then lost it.
Yeah, I'm somewhere between those two pictures right now, which is like fine with me. Like I prefer that.
I mean, quarantine has been brutal. I just keep ordering things, and then that's why I'm like realizing how small my
I
apartment is
expected
actually.
I would lose weight because I don't eat a lot of food, but I guess I'm just like because I'm ordering all the time, I'm just ordering bad.
I like get through a whole day. I'll be good to go. Maybe I'll like, before the thing had happened, I was hiking. Even sometimes after, there's like a secret trail or whatever. I'll sometimes do push-ups at home or whatever. It gets to the end of the night, like 11 o'clock, watching a movie. I'm like, you know what? I should just order a pizza. That sounds great.
Yeah,
I'll treat
I mean,
myself.
what is it? 4 p.m. today so far. I've had a coffee and a banana, which is
Yeah.
nothing, and I've
Right.
been working since 10. But I would say that what's going to happen is dinner time. I'm going to order a giant unhealthy meal, which is
Yeah.
like part of the problem with quarantine. Is like because my schedule is really all over the place. I just don't really have a lunchtime.
Right.
I don't know how to organize when to eat, so I'm just kind of snacking
If not,
until I order dinner.
if not for the fact that I just keep giving in to temptation late at night and ordering something horrible while I'm watching a movie, I definitely would have lost weight by now. But
I had 5 guys for dinner last night,
yes,
so
solid.
yeah. I need to stop, but it's so hard. Like, by the time that I'm ready to eat, because the way that I am working, it's generally like 9 PM, and half the places you wanna close, so I'm like, "McDonald's it is again, I guess."
Are you like postmating fast food? Please tell
Yeah.
me. Yeah, I'm doing the same thing. It's terrible. It's
It's
terrible.
hard not to. I think it's also, like, comfort food because it's kinda miserable right now, so you're like, "Well,
Yeah.
just give me some fries and some trash." Thankfully, I've not gained any weight. I just haven't lost any, and I expected to have lost some. Not that I'm trying to, it's not a goal,
Yeah.
but I expected to have just because generally, if I'm home for a long period of time, I lose weight because I don't have a big appetite, but
Yeah.
here we are. Just keep eating McDonald's.
I know. So, guys,
So
we've only got Alanah for a couple more minutes here, but I do want to remind everybody who's watching, please hit that like button, subscribe. It's so important to this channel. We just launched. This is the last day. We're taping this on the final day of the launch week. 2 shows, a great conversation, and Song from the Scene, which I'm really excited about. The first episode just went up. It's a cover of Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time and its infamous scene in Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. So did that one. I had a lot of fun with it. So if you guys want to hit that subscribe button, it would mean everything to me, and leave a comment below asking any questions that you have for Alanah. So just getting back for a second to what you were talking about with the experience that you had, kind of, I guess, getting in shape, getting fit, whatever you'd call it. I'm not sure what exactly it would be. The process of doing that for you, what sparked that? When was it that you just needed to do it?
I mean, this is such a real answer, but it was depression. Yeah, I was depressed. Clinically depressed. It was really bad for about a year, maybe. I really don't know, and that's a weird thing about the kind of depression that I had at that point in time was that I can't even really tell you because it's like that chunk of my life doesn't exist. Basically, like a traumatic event happened. I was depressed, just diagnosed depression. So I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to go anywhere. The day that like I was really confronted with it, it was like 3 p.m. and I was still in my room in bed. And I think my mom walked in and was like, "Get up, get out of bed." And I just said, "Why?" And I just couldn't understand for what purpose I would ever need to leave the room. Which meant that, I'm a very ambitious person, and that all just like kind of left me completely, and I didn't have any need to do anything. So when I had that moment of being like, I'm really wasting my life here. What's happening? Because that's not something that I had traditionally done. And this was the year after I left school, the year before I started games media, which probably also gave me the push to get where I am today too. But it was basically just this is bad and you need to fix it. So I started working out because it's so good for your mental health. And it did help me tremendously. It motivated me. I mean, obviously it's a rush of endorphins when you work out. But it was also just I was just really unhealthy. Like I'd get asthma attacks all the time. I had trouble sleeping. I would get sick really easily because I just wasn't working out. I was eating garbage and I was just laying in bed all day. So it was just very much I need to sort my life out. So that was it, mostly like forced by my parents. Were like, you need to do this. This is not good. But I'm very glad that they did that and that I had people supporting me and encouraging me to do that, because I don't know what would have happened otherwise. I don't know what I'd be doing now if I hadn't like gotten my life back together at that point in time when I preferred to just be sitting in bed playing Halo all day.
Yeah, I wish that I had like a cool thing that it was like associated with a job that when I was depressed lying in bed I could do, but I just play like Clash Royale on my phone. At this point, I'm just like really tired of, but I just I'll just like do a few minutes of this, I guess.
It happens.
Yeah. It's not the best. Anyway, guys, I want to thank Alanah for doing this interview with me today. I'm looking at the camera, but I want to be looking at you in the eyes to thank you. But to do that, I have to look at the camera. So that's the reality of what we're dealing
I understand. It looks like you're looking at me when you look at the camera, though, because I'm looking at you, so it looks like you're looking at me. So it works.
Totally. And she's had a green screen behind her this whole time. We could have had you in another country. We could have had you like in an aquarium.
You keep me anywhere if you want.
There's any number of places
that happen.
Yeah,
we can do it right now. Here we go.
There we go.
Boom.
Wow, we just
hanging out on the streets.
Things just got edgy so fast. We're stylized for a '90s movie.
Hell yeah.
But thank you so much for doing the show. Where can the folks find you if they want to follow along with what you're doing? What's the best place to get at you?
I am Alanah on all my social media, which I hate shouting out because I'm always like, you're not going to know how to. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Can you explain it? Because I've been following it. I don't get it.
It's Alanah in the middle of Charizard.
Ah.
So it's just Alanah Zard. Replace the I with the Alanah. Came up with it when I was 14. And at a certain point, I'd had it for too long to change it. So here we are. But it's also, if this is a show about media, I did have to study marketing as part of my degree. And the text is very recognizable. And in a digital age, having a string of letters together that are very recognizable is a huge asset to a brand. So if you see Alanah Zard written down, even if you can't read it or say it, you know exactly what it is immediately. It's very identifiable. So it's like, well, that works in my favor because of the strange string of letters that it is. But otherwise, it's just too late to change. I've had it for too long.
I've got like a bad email that I did it as a joke when I was 19 that was like, this will be, and then now it's still my email.
Yeah.
That's a tough one for me.
It happens.
Yeah. So, but all right, guys, you can follow her there. Again, thank you so much for doing this. And guys, we'll catch you on the next episode of A Great Conversation. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye. What's the email address, though?